Hello. I thought I'd talk a little bit about a little project I'm doing. Our cul-de-sac has a little mailbox shelter or mailbox house. And the houses in the development were built in the 1970s, at least at my end of the development. They were built in the 70s. And this is probably mostly the original mailbox house. You can see it's having a few problems and it's going to fall over soon. So I stepped up and said that I'd be willing to build a new one. Now, if we look elsewhere, this is over on the other side of the development, which was built a few years later. And they chose a kind of a nicer design, a design that looks like it's held up a little better. So I want to take this design and kind of modify it to make it work towards the existing one here. Now, I'm not sure yet whether I'm going to replace these posts and whether the posts need to stay there. You notice there's some constraints with the driveway, and we're also pretty near a transformer, so digging may be something we have to be very careful about. So I'm going to start by doing a design that's kind of inspired from this, and we'll kind of go from there. Now, I'm doing the design in Fusion 360, and I'm not going to walk you through the whole design because this takes quite a bit of time to do a design this complex. But I thought it might be interesting to kind of talk about a change that I've decided to make the design and kind of show one of the reasons I like Fusion so much is that I can change things on the fly. And the big difference, so this was kind of the first try at making the new design. And the top, if you notice the top, kind of look at what that looks like. And if I flip back, yeah, that's pretty much what it looks like, delta the shingles. So the top is about right, but if you look below the top, you notice there's a post there. And here I used 2x6, which is what the existing one used, or maybe a 2x8. That really doesn't look the same. I can't trim it out the same. So I'm going to do an operation here where we take this body here, this 2x6, and we're going to try to convert that to a 4x4. And we'll see if I have any luck doing that in Fusion. Now, one of the really cool things about Fusion is across the bottom, you can see all these little icons here. This is called a timeline. And this is basically all of the operations that I did to create this mailbox. So if we scroll back, and I can kind of click on, kind of give me an idea of what I was working on. But let me grab that, and let's go back to about here. You'll notice, hey, some of the pieces disappeared because those came after this part of the timeline. And that post happened to be pretty early. I think it's about here. Yeah. Okay. So this is the vertical 2x6, and essentially, what I want to do is convert it to a 4x4. So it'll be thinner this direction, it'll be wider that direction, obviously, and then it'll be kind of inset back from the board. If we look at the detail here, you notice how the post has kind of a margin around it. So it's kind of like the post goes through the middle. It's not how they built it. They actually notched it, but it's kind of like the post goes through the middle. So that's the look that I want to do here. Now, the way most operations work, many of the operations you do in Fusion are kind of a two-step. And I'll show you the one I used for this. A nice part, I can go back and edit it. So we have a little sketch here. I did a little modifying, so we're going to kind of go back to the way this was supposed to be. So okay, that was not what I wanted to happen. What I'm trying to do, when I originally do this, I said this line and this line are 1.5 inches. Okay. It should have moved the other constraint. Okay, we're just going to assume that's correct, even if it isn't. So anyway, I drew this rectangle here, and this was the flat part. You can think of this as kind of a flat drawing, or sketch is the Fusion term that sits on top of this board. So I do that, and then I said I was going to finish, and then the next operation was doing what's called an extrusion. So get to a good view here. And what I did is I selected this sketch that I just did, and I said I extruded it upwards. So I'm essentially taking this 2D object and extruding it upwards to be a 3D object. And then this here is the height, and the height is side height plus band height. And those are two parameters that I've set, numeric parameters. So side height is the spacing I wanted here, and band is, there's a little trim band around, it goes around the top. And I can go back and change those kind of globally, and that would change what the sketch looks like. So that's the extrusion part. What I really cared about was changing the sketch. So what I want here is, instead of this being a rectangle that's a 2x6, I want it to be a 4x4. And one of the things I did when I created it is I constrained these pieces so they wouldn't move. And now I have to figure out how to take off the constraints. Okay, so there's a constraint there. That one I took off before I started recording. What about here? Okay. That one you can see there's a constraint. I'm breaking this edge, so that's kind of unfortunate. But that I can move. Okay, so that hooked those back together. This one I can't move, which means there's some sort of constraint. And I probably have, it's called a coincident constraint. So this point is right on top of the point behind it, so they're kind of anchored together. And I think that's true for this line too. So I've found that. Okay. That's a constraint. Now maybe I can move this. Okay, so now I can move this. Now I have just this line. So I have to figure out how to get that line to move. And that moves, so there's no constraint there. I can delete coincident. Sometimes I found that it takes doing this a few times. There we go. Okay, so now I've gotten that so it isn't hooked up anymore. And let's convert it back. Okay, so now I have the real rectangle, and it's no longer constrained where it was in the past. Okay, so what do I know about this? Well, I want it to be, that's not what I expect. Okay, so that worked the way I expected that. I don't know why the other one didn't work. I wonder if I have a leftover constraint here. Okay. Just didn't work the way I expected it. Okay, so 3.5 inches, 3.5 inches. So that is now the size that I want it. That's a 4x4. And this is a 6x6, 6x6, 8x8, 3.5. 5.5. No, this is a 2x8. So what I want to do is kind of center this over around here at the end. And how could I do that? Well, I could do this dimensionally and say, you know, this should be 2 inches from this point to this point, and 2 inches from this point to this point. That's probably the way I'm going to do it. So I'm going to take this and that, turn on dimensioning. Turn on, that's weird. From that point to that point, drag out, and I want 2 inches. Okay, and you notice it moved the geometry to be the way I wanted it. And now we're going to want 2 inches. Okay. So now in Fusion terms, this object here, the 4x4, is now constrained. So it can't move, since this dimension here sets the distance from there to there, and this dimension here sets the distance from there to there. That constrains it, so we know that it's fixed in space. And the good part is if I change this so it's longer, that will remain fixed in space. So finish the sketch. Okay, we have the sketch, and look at that. Okay. So I've now changed that to a 4x4. Now it turns out that's not quite all that I want, but let's go back. One of the things that I want is, if we look at our drawing here, or picture here, you notice there's this little trim piece underneath, and that's going to be important. I could just leave this sitting on top, you know, and just attach it through the bottom, and that would work fine. But then I'm depending on the strength of the screws to attach to this. I think it might be a little more solid. Maybe I'll extend down that. Well, let's do what we did first. Okay, so I had that piece, and drag. Here's later on in the design. Okay, so later on in the design, these pieces kind of look where they're expected to be. So this piece was constrained. It was built off of what was the 2x6. And now that I've changed the location of the 2x6, it changed the location there. And similarly, the length of these was all constrained by the other pieces. So as you see, I could make it pretty easily. And one of the fun parts here, so I've just, in this one, I've just drawn this piece. And now I need this at the other end. And rather than drawing it again, well, I have, you can see these are called construction planes. This is a plane kind of halfway down the middle, bisecting the whole thing. So the next operation was to take this piece here that I just created and mirror it over the plane. And that's what that operation gives us. So in a lot of cases, what I've done here, like I built this one post, you notice I didn't build the other post. I built the post here, I mirrored it over the plane. And similarly, you know, if I draw something on the side here, I can mirror it across. So that's pretty common. Most of these operations, it's a symmetrical drawing. Most of the operations are mirroring. So let's keep going, kind of see how well we did. Okay. This is kind of a problem. Okay, so you notice that piece, and this is probably because I didn't constrain it right. Originally, this little upright there was an extension of the 2x6, and you notice now it's not the right thickness. Okay, so let's go back to where I created that. Wasn't there. Was it there? Yeah, there it is. Okay, so you can see that created a new piece there. So if I'd created it well, it would have automatically done that, but apparently I didn't. Okay, so let's go back and look at the sketch. Okay, so this was interesting. Instead of, I had two choices here. What I chose to do was, instead of starting here and extruding up, when you notice the profile of this sketch has this 45-degree angle to match the roof angle. So instead of starting there and extruding up, I started drawing there and extruded sideways. And of course the problem is, when I extruded sideways, I extruded enough sideways for a 1x, not for a 2x, not for a 4x. So what that means is, and here's the extrusion. So you can see I extruded that direction minus 1.5 inches, simply because it's kind of complex. When you start a sketch, you choose a plane, and then you always extrude up. And in this case, the plane was running this way, and I wanted it to extrude the other way, so it's minus So if we change that to minus 3.5, and look what we got. Now you may notice something interesting. If I can show you a good design. So you can see that, and I created that new one. And then I mirrored it down, so now I have those at the other end. But you notice I actually have two separate bodies here. There's that body, which is the new one, and that body, that's the old one. And they're really one piece. So what I'm going to do, this next operation, I'll do it twice. This next operation is called a combine. So what I did for each of these at the end, I took the top and the bottom and I said make this into one body. So now it's looking more like what we'd expect. We have the 4x4s that come all the way to the top. And we'll just keep going through. Okay, that's a little, I guess a ridge beam, we'd call it. Now here I added a little cross piece there. That was put in and extruded, and now mirrored once to do the one on the other side. Maybe you can't see it very well. Now I'm going to mirror both of them, mirrored to the other end. And then I'm going to do something cool. I want to have that same part I designed. I want to have some, essentially what would be rafters in a real roof. And that's actually done with an operation called pattern. So I essentially said, yeah, okay, now the pattern has a problem because I changed the distance. So we're going to fix this. And that, I could figure out the math, or I could probably figure out the constraint to do it. But essentially what I said is I'm going to take this object and I'm going to duplicate it along this axis 4 times. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And the 4 is here. I wouldn't actually build the 4th one. The 4 is there just to align with the one that's there. And that gives me the spacing right. Okay, so there we're looking nicer. Our roof's looking nicer. And what's next operation? I don't know what operation that did. Okay, that I need to do, back to a picture. Different shot. You notice it has some nice siding at the end. And I'm only going to simulate that for now. So I drew a siding and then I broke it up into sections. And then that got mirrored at the other end. So I have lines there. Turn off the planes. I have lines there. They wouldn't actually be flat pieces. They'd be angled pieces. And then finally, there's one side. That gets mirrored to the other side. I don't know what those last ones were for. Let's see. I click here. And now I have, notice that's kind of the way it looked, and that looks kind of anemic. You notice this part here has a nice, essentially a 2x kind of base under whatever the mailbox base is. That also not only looks good, that's going to keep this shelf from flexing up and down. It's going to turn essentially this part into kind of a box beam, and that will keep it from flexing much more. So that was just a little bit of playing around. And you can see it was actually really pretty simple. I had to do a little cleanup afterwards. Part of that is, I think, inherent in this sort of design. Sometimes you break things and you have to go through your timeline and change them. Some of it is clearly because I'm not great at Fusion. So that's what I wanted to show you, and that's my current mailbox house design. I might do a little video when it's finally done. Maybe. We'll see. Thanks for your attention.